So we spared no expense on our speaker this morning. We brought him all the way in from Yorba Linda. And actually, I heard a talk not long ago on this subject of grief and men in particular, or even though the story is about a woman. And it occurred to me that we are so, what's the word I want to use? Formed by our culture to not show grief. And the interesting part of this story is that unless Jesus saw this woman's grief, he wouldn't deal with her, he wouldn't heal her. And it occurred to me, if men refuse to show their grief or to deal with their grief, confront their grief, are we missing an opportunity for God to bless us? So my comments this morning, my thoughts this morning come from a HTB church in London. I have no idea what HTB stands for. I couldn't find anything about it, except they have several branches of it. And a guy who refers to himself as Vicar Will Vanderhart. So that's where my comments come from. If you're interested in more, I'll come to me afterwards and I'll let you know. But he was picking up on a series around the Jesus Manifesto. And this is a series of teachers based on Isaiah 61, but also linking in passages from Mark's gospel. And they sort of give an illustration of how Jesus acted upon the prophet's words in Isaiah. So does someone have their Bible? Can someone read Isaiah chapter 61, verses 2b and 3? And do we have a microphone that when this person reads, they can read into a microphone? Holding on. Somebody gonna get it? Got it? So that Jay can hear the words too. Just 2B and C. I'm 3, 2B and 3. And somebody else, why doesn't somebody else get ready? Mark 5, 24 to 34. 25 to 34.
And the day of vengeance of our God, to grant those who mourn in Zion, giving them a garland instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, the mantle of praise instead of a spirit of fainting, so they will be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he may be glorified.
So this is the prophet Isaiah saying something about the Redeemer. And let's see if we can find proof that the Redeemer activated those words. Can someone read to us Mark 5, 25 to 34?
Right after Matthew. Sando. You got a mark just before Luke.
This is a hopeless morning, I can tell.
Mark 5, 25 to 34.
Bingo.
A woman who had a hemorrhage for 12 years and had endured much at the hands of many physicians and had spent all that she had and was not helped at all, but rather had grown worse. After hearing about Jesus, she came up in the crowd behind him and touched his cloak, for she thought, if I just touch his garment, I will get well. Immediately, the flow of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her affliction. Immediately, Jesus, perceiving in himself that the power proceeding from him had gone forth, turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my garment?" His disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see the woman who had done this, but the woman, fearing and trembling, aware of what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction."
Thank you, Len. It's always promised that the Spirit of God would comfort all who mourn and provide for all who grieve. It's something that quite often is lost to us in our society, largely, I believe, because we have such a narrow view of what constitutes grief. When we hear the word mourn, we often think of people who are wearing black and maybe standing beside a graveside, or maybe civilians in a war zone whose house has been struck by a bomb. These are clear illustrations of grief, but they aren't the whole picture. I've stood at many grave sites, some of the most tragic and sad funerals you could imagine. And yet, even there, I see people trying to hold their emotions, desperate not to cry, desperate to show no perceived weakness. This is displayed on their own definition of grief and our resistance to mourning. Many of us are carrying significant griefs in our lives today. It may be that you're silently mourning behind your bright smile. The woman in Mark 5 was grieving. Most obviously, she was grieving 12 years of menstrual bleeding. But as with many of the griefs that we experience, there were many griefs behind the grief. She was mourning not being able to have children. She was mourning complete social exclusion. She was mourning not being able to attend the temple because of the prohibitions of Leviticus 15:13. She was mourning the loss of her status in society. She was mourning the loss of her personal social relationships. You see, grief isn't something that's reserved for the death of a loved one. It's also our experience when our dreams are left unrealized. Maybe you can directly relate to this woman. Through singleness, through physical health issues. But maybe you also recognize other griefs in your life, that you won't or didn't realize your career dreams, that you're not going to get that promotion you were dreaming of, that you haven't found a stable relationship in this stage of your life, that your partner isn't the person you thought they were when you married. Maybe it's because your relationship with your son or daughter isn't what you think it ought to be. Maybe it's because you see your wife's health deteriorating. Maybe your family aren't going to affirm your successes like you'd hoped they would. You may be thinking, oh, those are just disappointments. But disappointments are like when your boiled egg is a little too hard, or maybe when the theater seats are a little too far back. Grief is any experience in which you mourn the death of something, be that a dream, an ambition, an aspiration, or a relationship. I have to tell you, when I was first listening to this, I was in tears thinking of so many of my friends who are grieving. They may not realize they're grieving, but they're suffering. I thought particularly of Richard and his scoliosis that's almost got him chairbound. When I had a stroke 6 years ago, I really struggled to correlate my experience with grief. I was so determined that I wouldn't use the word grief because I was so thankful I'd been spared the severe damage so many stroke victims face. I felt that it was faithless to talk about grief. I just wanted to be grateful all the time. I mean, so thankful that I had made it through this terrifying, life-changing experience. Before my stroke, I spent a lifetime trying to introduce my sons to a wide variety of athletic activities. Skiing, snowboarding, jet skiing, fishing, surfing, water skiing, scuba diving, snowmobiling, mountain biking, hiking. Up until my stroke, I wanted to make sure that my sons enjoyed every sport possible. After my stroke, it took all of my energy to avoid losing my balance and falling flat on my face. I remember saying to my therapist, "Oh, that's fine. I'm just glad I can use my legs at all." The fact is, I wasn't fine. I'd be one. Hang on. I realized when I started moving around the house and I had this really urge to put my leg out and kick the people who were moving past me. I realized I was mourning mobility. I was mourning normal walking. I was mourning the fact that I would not be able to chase or race with my granddaughters. I hadn't let it break in because I was so desperate to be grateful. If I was listening to this talk, I'd be wondering, are you just opening a massive can of worms here? Are you unlocking some terrible thing which once burst out can never be put back? How am I going to hold it all together? Are you unleashing the floodgates? Or are you just going to fall apart? We rarely mourn because our circumstances don't provide us with the framework within which it's safe to do so. We experience many blockages to grief in our lives. Some of the blocks we face are difficult things around a lack of confidence. We lack understanding about what grief and what it is. We think we're just experiencing disappointments. We lack awareness of our own grief. Sometimes things are hidden within us that we've lost and we never grieved or never really engaged with. We lack the confidence to engage with the griefs that we have experienced because we're not quite sure how to process them. And mostly, we lack support. We just don't know who to turn to when we're experiencing grief. The reality of all of these lacks is that we're blocked altogether from experiencing grief and therefore moving through the grief in our lives. The woman in this story in Mark was bleeding, had been blocked from grief for 12 years. The law prohibited her from going to the temple, the place of her spiritual, physical, social, cultural healing. If she couldn't go to the temple, she couldn't see the doctor. If she couldn't go to the temple, she couldn't see the social worker. If she couldn't go to the temple, she couldn't see her rabbi or pastor. If she couldn't go to the temple, she couldn't engage with her community. If she couldn't go to the temple, she couldn't engage with other women. She was blocked from grieving because the place that she needed to be was the place that would cast her out. The Holy Spirit offers us the right context for recovery. In Isaiah 61, 2b and 3, he offers us two essential supports to grief: comfort and provision. God has come to comfort all who mourn and provide for those who grieve in Zion. That's what it says. Grief is like the pressure within us. It's like a balloon. Picture a balloon. It's a deep thing, but it's a hollow thing. It's a dark feeling that kind of builds up within us like a great pressure, but it also hollows us out from within. And we can walk around carrying this grief, yet refusing to ever truly engage with it. But the Holy Spirit comes to offer us a different sort of comfort. And his comfort, his embrace, begins to deflate the power of grief in our lives. His support, his comfort, lets out the power of grief. So just think of the balloon deflating. But God doesn't want to leave us empty. He wants to refill us. He wants to breathe his spirit into us, offering us this new support, this comfort, this provision. We're comforted by his spirit, and he provides for us and he refills us with good things. We need both his support and we need his provision. So picture the balloon reinflating now with God's spirit inside. This is what I call CPR. We actually need comfort and provision for recovery, CPR. The Spirit has come to us in order that we might have the comfort of him, the comfort of God. He's come to comfort those who grieve. He's come to comfort those who are brokenhearted. He's come to provide for us so we're not just deflated from emptiness and hollowness, the pain of grief. We're refilled with his spirit again. And through his comfort and through his provision, we experience incredible recovery. Jesus provides both comfort and provision for the grieving woman in Mark 5. In verse 28, she says, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed." The Greek word for healed is the word sozo, which means much more than physical healing. It means literally to be made whole. The woman who was bleeding was a penniless, nameless outcast. Her grief was more than anemia. It was more than cramps. It was more than exhaustion, even though those were a terrible part of her experience. But she needed more than a healing. She needed a biopsychosocial spiritual restoration in order that she might be whole. It wasn't enough that her bleeding might stop. This woman was an outcast of outcasts. She needed to be made whole by Jesus and his Spirit. When we carry unresolved grief, it eats away at us. It eats away at our God-given identity. You see, where there's loss, there's also blame. Internally, we begin to believe that we're responsible, and we carry shame. We carry the shame of loss as much as we carry the loss itself. This woman had an illness, and yet she'd become an outcast. When she approached Jesus, she approached him from behind. She didn't want to be seen. She touches him in a crowd because she fears condemnation. She doesn't anticipate his love. Vicar Vanderhart tells about when he was traveling on the RER in France, which is like the tube in England, but deeper underground. He had the confidence of a London traveler. He would think to himself, I'm in France. It's the same thing. His wife, who lived in France, told him before they got to the RER, make sure you haven't got your wallet in your back pocket. He remembers thinking, that's ridiculous. I don't need to think things like that on the tube in London. I'm not going to think things like that on the RER in France. When he got on the train with his 2 children and his baggage, 2 friendly local French gentlemen sort of bumped him on the shoulders. He thought, well, maybe it's a French greeting. And so he stepped onto the train and kind of looked around at the various other traveling passengers, his companions on the route. As he left the train, they both bumped him on the shoulders again, slightly harder than the first time. When they bumped him again, he thought, wow, this really is a friendly place in Paris. He suddenly realized that his wallet was not in his back pocket, but it was departing rapidly, running down the platform at great speed. His wife took chase after the first gentleman, who passed the wallet to his friend, who was a faster runner than he was. And she caught up with him and she said, hey, give me my husband's wallet back. And Vanderhart thought to himself, you know, I might lose my wife as well as my wallet. So he politely stepped in and said, I'm Vicar Vanderhart. Surely you know we're all Europeans at this current time. I'd just like to have my wallet back. Needless to say, he didn't get his wallet back. But it was interesting because beside being targeted, despite the fact that he was a victim, he felt ashamed at his loss. He felt ashamed. He felt guilty. He felt embarrassed that he'd been pickpocketed. He was the victim, but he felt ashamed. Mark, in his story, raises a powerful question about the woman's internal experience. Based on the cultural context of her actions, it's clear that she did feel profound shame and loss. But Jesus' response was a decisive rebuke to the idea that she should feel that way. Should the woman feel loss and shame? Culturally, the answer from her society was a resounding yes. The woman with bleeding lived in a culture that shamed women. The Hebrew word for menstruation, found this fascinating, is midah, which literally means to cast out, to be banned, to be separated, or to be moved away. Roman culture, which was as much a player in Jewish culture as in Israel at the time, was equally hostile. The Roman philosopher and author Pliny the Elder blamed women's blood for turning new wine sour, for making crops wither, killing grafts, drying seeds, and killing bees, and rusting fine iron and bronze. Such was this woman's shame after 12 years of illness in this culture that she approaches Jesus in this packed crowd, avoiding his glance. Psychologist Dr. John Townsend says, this is why God put tears up there in our eyes, because someone should be looking at us when we're crying. Then we know that we're not alone. We know that our tears are seen and heard. For this woman, bound by shame and bleeding after 12 years in this hostile culture, she came to Jesus from behind. She didn't want to be seen. She wanted to avoid him. She didn't even intend to touch his body. She just wanted to touch his cloak because she believed that she would defile Jesus if she touched him. Yet such was her faith that she also believed, if I just touch his clothes and I'll be healed. John Bowlby, who did influential work on attachment theory after the Second World War, defined 4 aspects of human attachment that enable us to connect: proximity maintenance, separation anxiety, a safe haven, and a secure base. The idea of proximity and loss is the central beam But the idea of comfort and provision is the crossbeam. The nature of attachment is resolved in the person of Jesus on the cross. He spread out his arms of love towards us and said, I will be a safe haven for you. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, heavy laden, and I will give you rest. He was also the great provider. You see, his life is about calling a kingdom come, taste and see. Many of us carry our griefs as shame. Maybe you carry a sense of shame around your singleness or your unemployment or your financial difficulties. Maybe your grief is your relationship with one of your children or grandchildren or your wife. In our perfectionist culture, we can try and approach Jesus in that same crowd, just hoping to touch the hem of his garment for an immediate healing to our circumstance. That way, maybe we can avoid the shame that we are loath to share. But Jesus hasn't come to simply restore us from our circumstances. He's come to restore us. He's come to meet with us. This is a contrast between a life of mourning lived under the crown of ashes from Isaiah 61, where your dreams are reduced to dust, and the crown of beauty, which is a sign of the restoration of your dignity. The oil of joy in Isaiah 61 was not some highbrow perfume to decant around your neck. It was a sign of honor. Your honor has been restored. It's not what we've lost has been restored to us. It's as though you've been made whole despite your loss. When Jesus realized the power had gone out of him, he could have let the woman walk away. You might think it would have been more compassionate for Jesus just to let the woman go away with her physical healing. In fact, Jesus was asking her to admit her problem was a source of, to admit her let me try that again. In fact, Jesus asking her to admit her problem was a source of danger for her. She had to admit openly that she was violating Jewish law. But Jesus wants to offer her more than she requested. The woman wanted to secretly take her healing from Jesus, but Jesus wanted to publicly give the woman more than she came for. And she comes trembling in fear. Such was the Levitical value on a woman's bleeding that a man would be defiled, a rabbi would be defiled by being touched by a woman who is experiencing her period. She comes trembling in fear. Her grief has been exposed to the crowd, and no doubt her sense of shame has been multiplied tenfold. She falls at Jesus' feet, shaking, expecting a punishment. She's carrying a spirit of heaviness, which is so common to those who grieve, men and women alike. She touched the great rabbi's clothes. Surely she defiled him. Yet Jesus removes the cloak of grief from her shoulders, and he replaces it with a garment of praise. He says, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be free from your suffering." First, he says, "Daughter." He lifts the grief of loss and gives her the comfort of family. This daughter has a father. Secondly, he says, "Your faith has healed you." He lifts the spiritual shame and gives her spiritual honor. Thirdly, he says, "You've been healed." He announces her healing to the community around her, which reestablishes her place in society and community. Effectively, he's enabled her to come back in. And fifthly, he says, be freed from your suffering. This is a direct call to those around her, to those who have excluded her, to those who have cast her aside, to be free not just from the suffering from within, but the suffering from without. This is the nature of the kingdom, and this is the nature of the king. He was on his way to heal the daughter of one of the most powerful and most influential people in the region at the time, Jairus, whose 12-year-old daughter was facing death. Yet he stops to help the most unknown, the most powerless, the most penniless woman in the society. At the time, an unnamed and unknown woman from 12 years of bleeding. He's on his way to raise a 12-year-old from death, but before that, he releases an older woman from 12 years of spiritual and emotional and social death. This is a divine diversion. You should know that today God is ready to take a divine diversion for you and for your grief. You might not think you're the most important person in the room, the worthy person, or the big spiritual person in the room. But God has come to take a divine diversion into your life, to set you free, to give you spiritual wholeness, to offer you sozo. He's honestly inviting you to look him in the face. Your griefs might be as hidden, as secret, as socially insignificant as this woman's did at the time. But they are urgent to God. They are significant to God, and they are worthy of his touch. More than that, God's supernatural work in the life of one has a supernatural work in the life of many. In 1 Corinthians 1:27, it says, God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. And God chose to shame the world through this woman. This woman, in her encounter with Jesus, transformed the experience of every single woman in this city and every single woman in the Western world. As a result of Jesus's interaction with the woman with the bleeding, the Greek and Syriac churches chose to protect women from religious and social exclusion during their periods. This happened immediately within the establishment of the early church. These churches chose to protect women from social expulsion, and as a result, the Roman world changed its view about women and bleeding. As the Roman world was Christianized, women's experience in the seasons of their period was also transformed. No longer were they excluded. Because of this penniless, pitiless, unknown woman, God changed the world. In 601 AD, Pope Gregory, the leader of the church in the known world at that time, universally stated that women should not be kept out of church or away from communion during their periods. Why? Because Jesus said, you're clean, you're mine. There's no shame that's bounding you anymore. There's no exclusion for you. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord was upon Jesus to provide for those who grieve in Zion. The temple of God could not and would not be out of reach for any, not for the poor, not for the marginalized, not for the stigmatized, not for the sick, not for the mentally ill, not for the disabled, and not for women with bleeding, and not for you. The temple of God in Jesus Christ calls us for a face-to-face encounter. He invites us to receive and embrace. He longs for you to bring your griefs to him because he's got comfort and provision for you. He's got everything that you need, and his arms are stretched out wide. He wants to look you in the face. He invites you out of the crowd. He longs to restore you. Thank you for your attention this morning.